If you are an astute listener, and I know that you are, if you are a serious student of the Bible, if you are a God-fearing, Bible-believing follower of Jesus, then after the past 3 weeks of reading the book of Ruth, and after hearing the last chapter today, and hearing how this book ends, you have got to be asking the question, why was it okay for Boaz to break the law? We're talking Torah law. We're talking first 5 books of the Bible, Moses' law. We're talking Deuteronomy chapter 23. Never, 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 ever can a Moabite ever enter into the family of Israelite faith. It's a verse in the Bible. It's right there in black and white. So for those of you who are wondering, and rightfully so, why Boaz was allowed, even rewarded, for breaking the law, I am about to set you free. I'm at least going to give you the opportunity to be set free. The choice to live free is going to be yours. I want to do that today by looking at 2 characters in the last chapter of the book of Ruth, particularly how these 2 characters live life and live law differently. The first character is the other kinsman, who could not see beyond the letter of the law. It seems like Boaz knows that this kinsman loves the law, is a stickler for the law, and so he meets him at the gate in chapter 4. You heard the story a moment ago, and he says to him, I've got a legal issue for you, because this guy loves the law. He says, Naomi, who came back from Moab, has a parcel of land that she's about to sell, and you get first dibs on it because you're the closest kin, and that's the law. And immediately he says, oh, I want it, I want it, I want it, I want it. Everybody, I want the land. And then Boaz says, well, and also, the Moabite who came from Moab, who happens to be a Moabite named Ruth, did I mention she was a Moabite? She comes with it. And since she hasn't had any children, you are required by law to make sure that she has some children to perpetuate her husband's name, and you're going to have to give her a portion of your wealth. And all of a sudden the guys say, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm not going to marry a Moabite. I'm not going to have children by a Moabite. I'm not going to give a Moabite part of my wealth. It's against the law. Deuteronomy chapter 23 says, no Moabite can ever enter into the Israelite family of faith. I'm not going to do that. And Boaz's response, fine then, I will take her for myself. Let's seal the deal according to the law, because I know you're a stickler for the law. And in that moment, we see one of the saddest scenes in all of biblical literature. The next of kin, by clinging to the law, wanting to make sure that he lived up to this one verse that he knew, missed the opportunity to be the great-grandfather of King David and even find himself later in the lineage of Jesus the Christ. Why did that happen? I know it makes no sense to some people, but it happened because he kept the law. In fact, the Hebrew language, the Hebrew text here makes it crystal clear that we don't even know who this guy is. I love this particular verse. When it was read a moment ago in the New Revised Standard Version, it says that Boaz looked up and said to him, come here, friend, and it's translated friend. It's actually 2 words in Hebrew, felone, almone, and it means literally so-and-so. Not friend, it's so-and-so. Come here, so-and-so. Boaz says to the next tree, we don't even remember his name. We know everybody else's name in this story. We know Boaz and Ruth's names, Naomi's names, we know Elimelech's names, we know their children's names who died. We know everybody's name in this story except this person, so-and-so. All we know of him is that he could not see beyond the letter of the law, he couldn't get beyond this one verse in his Bible, and he missed what might have been the greatest joy of his life. He missed relationship. Now, in contrast, there's another individual I want us to look at. His name is Boaz. And Boaz is one of these people who just risks growth and change. He's not afraid of his own growing edges, and he's not afraid of change. We've talked about Jewish faith development before in other classes and in other sermons and how it relates to the structure of the Old Testament. So that before you were 12 years old, you read the law and studied the law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And that's all you studied until your bar mitzvah or your bat mitzvah. And then once you turned 12 and moved into your teenage years, you started studying the prophets, because the prophets questioned the law all throughout the prophets. And it's not until your adult years that you really understand the writings, books like Job and Ecclesiastes and Psalm and Ruth. Ruth is there because these books talk about the complexities of life, the gray areas of life that always don't fit well within the black and white, right and wrong, yes and no of the law. Are you ready to be set free? I told you I was going to set you free. Are you ready to be set free? Some of you are not going to be able to handle this, and that's okay. Because it's easier just to have rules. It's easier just to have laws. It's easier just to say yes and no, right and wrong, black and white. So some of you are not going to like this, but here it comes. We were never meant to get stuck in the law. No one was ever meant to get stuck in the law. The best Jewish rabbis and scholars will tell you no one was ever meant to be stuck in the law. That's why we have the prophets and the writings. I love teaching Old Testament at Mercer University. I used to love those moments when you could see in the students' eyes that the light bulb finally came on, that they had this aha moment where they finally got it, that the Bible wasn't meant to be read literally, but rather it's a conversation with God, and it opens you up to explore all of these interpretations and graceful, compassionate ways of reading this text and talking to God about your relationship with God and other people. And then there's always the other students. I had at least one every semester. You know, that one student who after the lecture comes to the desk and says to you, "My preacher told me about you. You were going to start making me question my faith." To which I always responded, "Dang straight. If you're not questioning your faith by the time you're 19, 20, and 21 years old, something is wrong with your faith development. You're not supposed to be stuck in the law." How did the Apostle Paul say it? "When I was a child, I thought as a child." You're supposed to. "But when I became an adult, I shifted my mode of thinking and began to think like an adult." I have told you this before, but it bears telling again simply because I like telling it. When my children were little, I stood them in front of our stove just like you did, and I told them, "Don't you ever, 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 ever touch that stove." "When can you touch the stove?" "Never, Daddy, we can." "That's exactly right. Don't you ever touch that stove." You did the same thing. I know you did. And then when they turn 14 and 15 years old and you're watching the Australian Open and they walk in and they want a pizza and you don't want to get up off the sofa because you're right at that point in the match, you don't want to leave, and you say to them, "Oh, okay, well, listen, this is what I want you to do. You know, be really, really careful in there. Put those little gloves on, those little mitts on, and open it up and preset it and put it in. And you call me if you need anything. I'm going to be right here." And then when my children got to be 25 and 28 and 30 years old and they come to my house, I asked them, "Why aren't you using the stove? Cook something." Now, did the law change? No, for the rest of their life, just like you and me, they will live with the law in the back of their mind. The stove has the capacity to hurt me. But as I grew up, I had to learn to live with the stove. I had to learn to integrate that into my life. The yes and no and the right and the wrong and the black and the white of the stove doesn't hold anymore when you're 30 years old. Life's more complex. Let me walk you through the Bible one more time, just for fun, because I love it. Deuteronomy chapter 23 is the law. It says, "Never, ever, ever may a Moabite or foreigner be in the family of Israel." But when you get to the prophets, in Isaiah 56, Isaiah argues with this. And he says, wait a minute, what if a foreigner wants to keep Sabbath? And what if a foreigner wants to keep covenant? God says, "Then they will have a place in my house," and you know this next verse, "and my house shall become a house of prayer for all people." And by the time you get to the book of Ruth and the writings, Boaz is marrying a Moabite. Boaz was willing to risk change, willing to grow in his understanding. And in doing so, he knew the joy of marriage, he knew the joy of fatherhood, he knew the joy of having a great-grandson who was the king of Israel, he knows the joy of being listed in the lineage and family of Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 1. He accepted a Moabite when the rest of the religious world thought it was the wrong thing to do because the Bible says, and there's a verse. He knew the law, and he had questioned the law, but he interpreted the law according to grace and compassion. And because he did, we know Boaz's name. And we have no idea who so-and-so was. Not a clue. If Jesus taught us anything, he taught us this. If reading a verse of the Bible causes you to hate, judge, ostracize, demean, or treat another human being as less than human, then you are reading the Bible wrong. Say it again. If reading the Bible, a verse of the Bible, causes you to hate or judge or ostracize or demean or treat another human being as less than human, you are reading the Bible wrong. This is the Jesus who harvested grain on the Sabbath, even though there was a verse that said not to do it, who touched lepers, even though there was a verse that said not to do it, who healed the lame, even though there was a verse that said not to do it, who talked to Samaritans, even though there's a verse that said not to do it, who let a prostitute wash his feet, even though there's a verse that says not to do it. I'll say it again because from Jesus' perspective, if you're reading the Bible in a way that it makes you hate, judge, ostracize, demean, or treat another human being as less than human, you're reading it wrong. That's not the way Jesus read and lived out the Bible. So in Ruth chapter 4, the people of faith gather at the gate. This is really important. It only took 2 witnesses to exchange property. That swapping the sandals thing, you just needed 2 people to watch that to make the property exchange valid. But if you wanted to interpret the Torah, if you wanted to interpret the law, you had to have the whole community together. So the whole community is gathered at the gate. And listen, they decide that the law concerning the Moabite in Deuteronomy 23 was not graceful or compassionate, and they decide to give Ruth a place in the family of Israel. That's momentous. This is what Jesus was talking about when he told his disciples, I am giving you the keys to the kingdom. What you bind on earth or loose on earth will be bound in heaven or loosed in heaven. What you decide the community of faith is going to look like, God is going to bless. And the only new commandment I'm going to give to you, Jesus said, was this, that you love one another the way that I loved you. And how did I love you? I touched lepers and prostitutes and Samaritans and Romans and lame people and fishermen and tax collectors and, you get the point. I wonder who the modern-day Moabites might be. People who in every generation seem to be kept distance from the family of faith because somebody knows a verse that keeps them out. Nicole Nordeman, a wonderful songwriter and performer, wrote a song several years ago called Please Come. I want to end the sermon reading the words of that song to you. I love it. She wrote, "Oh, the days when I drew lines around my faith to keep you out, to keep me in, to keep it safe. And oh, the sense of my own self-entitlement to say who's wrong or who doesn't belong or cannot stay. Because somewhere someone decided that we'd be better off divided, and somehow despite all the damage done, God still says come. And oh, the times when I have failed to recognize how many chairs are gathered there around the feast to break the bread and break these boundaries that have kept us from our only common ground, that is, the invitation to sit down if we will come. There is room enough for all of us. Please come. And our arms are open wide enough. Please come. And our parts are never greater than the sum. This is the heart of the one who stands before an open door and bids all of us God bids us come.